Hi, it's Jo and Steve from Freshagenda, and Steve, you're bringing the summer in today.
It's a hot day in Melbourne, early November. We're in the mid-30s, so that's ominous for the summer down here.
Yeah, that's for sure, but you're looking good. So Steve, this week we're going to give a bit of an update on our Global Dairy Directions, the latest report that went to subscribers yesterday. And that's probably another reason why you're looking so summery and relaxed, because that's out of the way for another month.
Pack it up, pack it in, let me begin.
What are some of the highlights of the outlook?
Look at the big picture level. Not a lot of change from what we saw in the previous update, and then the one before that. So things are fairly stable. I guess overall market tension we're seeing, as you can see here, is dipping a little as we go into a New Zealand spring. That's more milk on the way, obviously, but I guess that's not a real change. But when you sit back and look at the shift in milk production that we're seeing, it is a positive thing. We're seeing a big slowdown in growth of milk output the second half of the year, with Europe slowing appreciably.
Sure.
Despite the fact that New Zealand is growing stronger, the second half of the year is only a 0.7% increase in total milk output year on year. That comes after the first half was about 1.8.
Yeah.
So we are seeing a slowdown. Key thing though, the chart on the right looks at what does that mean with the overall balance of the market, with supply and demand taken into account. The green bars represent the net effect of that. So we are moving into a slight positive situation with that slowdown. And it's not much. It won't get the traders or the brokers very excited because it isn't much of a change. But at the commodity level, there are quite diverse impacts.
Yep.
And I think that's the important thing to take from this.
That's right. So we're just going to put up, and we've put up this before, just this map of some of the milk pools and the product linkages that are really being influential for driving value at the moment.
Yeah. Start with a big one. It's European milk supply and the impact on, as we go later into 2018 and the first quarter of 19, we're seeing obviously a slowdown in milk with the weather conditions. That's impacting the milk solids, but also that's going to impact product mix quite dramatically. So we're watching that fairly carefully, understanding what's happened when Europe has been shrinking milk in the past. How does it allocate milk to the major product groups?
Sure.
So I think a bit of a slowdown in fat availability. There's obviously a trade-off between the value of the returns out of skim and butter versus cheese. It's a delicate balance. They're pretty close together. So we think we're going to see a bit less fat availability, a bit less skim, as the market tries to keep the cheese market in balance.
Yeah, that's usually the priority, and knowing all the time that there is this big intervention stockpile that's slowly being sold down. And depending on that availability of new product, there'll be an appetite or not for some of those tender sales over the next couple of months.
Yeah, intervention's like a big storage tank for the requirements. So depending how demand goes, it'll draw on those stocks. So that's interesting. Naturally, skim values in Europe impact other regions directly.
Yes,
there are very close linkages there. The butterfat value, obviously, that's still very high compared to where it's been, certainly compared to veg oil, so that's keeping a lid on whole milk values. And
keeping those fat-filled powders still quite attractive for some buyers.
Yeah, for some buyers in some regions. On the cheese side of this chart, the lower cheese values in Europe being pushed down by the fat values. We've seen some fragility in the US market because of the loss of trade into Mexico to some extent. There's some slowdown in trade into other markets. So that's made that market a bit fragile and caused it in the last short while to lose quite a bit of value. So that's impacting the Oceania cheese values as well. So there's pressure on that side of the chart from that point of view. So rounding it up, those little stars or splashes where the hot items are. So we've got more of those this time than we had in the previous look at this chart. So it is a fairly dynamic situation around the commodities. We've done a bit of work on this pretty important relationship in Europe between what is essentially the stock turnover of butter as measured by those reported stocks, and they're a bit loose.
Yes.
So what we've shown here is a stock turn index that we constructed, and how very closely the butterfat prices have tracked that. So
Yeah.
this is one of our key fundamental insights here, is when you look at that relationship and then look at it going forward.
Sure.
So we construct scenarios with the outlook for butterfat values, because this demand is unclear. Swinging to skim milk powder, similar analysis. This is where we're looking at the rundown of the intervention stocks, clearance sale we call it. But the stock turn here is the total situation.
Yeah. So this is public and private stocks.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So there's a slow increase in turnover as those stocks move out into the supply chain and into the marketplace. The EU skim milk powder values have tracked that recently, and again we construct different scenarios about where they might go, depending on the speed of that rundown and the way in which stocks unwind. So they're important parts of our outlook.
Sure.
Looking at the trade war impact, it goes much wider than the narrow impact on the US. So now we're seeing some greater caution at the demand side of the world market. The impact of these weaker Asian currencies, which are impacted by the effects of China's slowdown in the economy, the risks for these dependent regional players. On the right there, just showing how the trade in milk powders has trended into Southeast Asian countries. So whilst there's been a bit of a stock rebuild in whole milk powder, skim milk powder, on the face of it there might be a bit of capacity, but there's also pretty much caution going on. So here, just summing up the big things that matter, really, some positives and some negatives. Milk slowdown on the left-hand side is probably the biggest effect. Just at the bottom there, while we see on the right New Zealand's got a stronger season and milk growth is quite healthy, we're also seeing some drying out occur, and the El Nino, the El Nino, we talked about that last week. The El Nino effect is certainly here in Australia, whether it's moving across to New Zealand. Some other negatives on the right hand side, watching that butter situation and that uncertainty around the trade policy and how that might impact going forward. So it's a balanced picture. And we also wrap up with a view on where our projected fundamentals are going. Butterfat's likely to lose value, that pulls down cheese in the middle of the year, and the weakness in whole milk powder with that stronger New Zealand supply. So that mixed position we talked about.
And just on the right, I guess we thought we'd just illustrate some of the work that gets done in the Global Dairy Directions monthly, with different scenarios, and you can see there just the impact on different projected fundamental value series on different scenarios for supply and demand. So it's part of the work we do with the Global Dairy Directions analysis.
I came to get down, so get out your seat and jump around.
So now, Joe, your chart of the week. What have you got for this time?
Well, the chart of the week this week, we're returning back to the US and just looking at some of the dynamics on the CME that have emerged in the last little while. On the left there, obviously daily cheese prices, and again, we're tracking this disparity between blocks and barrels. The gap just looks like it's just widening again at the moment, but some crazy trends there. And then on the right, we've kind of been expecting that maybe whey prices would weaken because of the Chinese disputes. That's the biggest market for whey out of the US, but it's held pretty steady, but now it's just fallen off a cliff.
Reality bit.
Yes.
Yeah. Extra tariffs took effect in the last week of September, and it's like that's really hit home. The business is going to slow down appreciably, and maybe bring the market back into a bit of balance, because I think they were complaining about it being so short in the US and a bit heated. So the talk is now it's coming more into alignment. Yeah,
it's down around that $1,000 a tonne, so one to watch.
Okay. Well, I think that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. Hope you've enjoyed the colourful shirt, the birds, and the other passing noises. That's a wrap from us. We look forward to seeing you next week.